Hi, I'm Suzanne McCallum. I'm a senior lecturer in the Adam Smith Business School.
I'm David Nicol. I'm a research professor in the business school, and I lead the Teaching Excellence Initiative, a major part of which is looking at assessment and feedback and how we can improve it. The theme of the conference is Bridging Theory and Practice, and this relates directly to the University of Glasgow's assessment through feedback strategy, which is about students taking a more active role in feedback and assessment processes in ways that help develop their ability to self-regulate their own learning and to prepare them for professional practice. My research is looking at feedback in a completely new way, where I get students to write their own feedback comments before receiving comments from the teacher. And this not only improves their ability to take more agency over feedback, but it also improves the effects of teacher comments, because the teacher gains extra information about what students are learning in this method. Other approaches to increasing student agency and feedback, which is a hot topic educationally worldwide, are really focused on the idea of feedback comments. The idea is that students should take more agency in seeking out, using and acting on feedback comments provided by teachers, that there should be more interaction between teachers and students over the feedback process, with students taking a greater share of responsibility. However, there are problems with this method. It means that students' own agency is always tied to the agency of the teacher, and it can create a dependency relationship with some students. Weaker students just want more and more feedback from the teacher. Also, if we go down this path, then students requesting feedback from the teacher, if all students requested feedback from the teacher, it's not very scalable, because the teacher would be completely overloaded. But the more fundamental problem with this is that it doesn't really build on the feedback agency that students are already engaged in. For example, when a student is producing some work and they check their understanding out in a textbook and update their work, or they go online to find some information and they improve their work, they're generating their own feedback all the time. So our research is really about building on this natural feedback agency that students are doing when they're not involved with comments from other people, but integrating that also with the comments situation. To capitalise on these informal processes, we've developed a simple sequence that students need to do something, make comparisons, and then make the results of those comparisons explicit. So, for example, the student might solve a problem, write an essay, and then they need to compare that against some resource, not against comments, because comments are only one kind of resource, but they might compare what they've done against some information in a textbook, some information in a journal article, some information in a video, information in a rubric, and then they write their own self-feedback comments. And these three things are important: that they do some work, they make a comparison, and they make their feedback explicit in some way. They can also, of course, use that feedback that they've written to update their work or to have a discussion with peers, and that's another way of making it explicit. So there are just three things the teacher needs to do with this methodology. One is select the information for comparison. Two is to formulate the instructions for comparison, because the instructions can focus students on specific aspects of their work, and that's important, especially if we want to develop students' critical thinking. And then the third thing is they must make the results explicit in some way, because that gives the teacher some information about what students can generate, so she can adapt her feedback comments to that.
I've been using this in my financial accounting class with my first year students, and following the sequence that David has outlined of do, compare, make explicit. So the first thing I ask my students to do is to complete a depreciation computation. So we're taking this into a computational area where it's often less obvious what comparators that you should pick. So after the students have completed the computation, I've asked them to make a comparison against two different resources, one of which is your traditional worked solution, that's what you would tend to give, and then also a video of an expert talking through the computation and explaining their thinking behind it. And then in order to make the output explicit, we've given the students a series of questions to answer, so they're actually writing out their own self-feedback comments. We've selected two different comparators, the first of which is a worked solution, which is what you would traditionally see within an educational context. The second, the expert video, is more similar to a sort of professional context that our students might be in after they complete their studies, because it's not normal in a work context to have a worked solution. We also kind of hypothesised that the different comparators might lead to different outcomes and different kinds of feedback that the students might generate. Well, after each comparator, we gave the students a series of 3 questions that we wanted them to write the response to. So first of all, we just asked them, what did you learn from this comparison? Then the second question asked them about how could they improve their work. And then finally, we asked them to write down any comments, any questions they had for me, where they would like further feedback. So they were doing all of this before the class. The idea was that I could then look through the student comments and I could pick up areas where the students needed help and feedback, and I could cover that at the beginning of the face-to-face session. Looking at the self-feedback comments that the students generated, it was clear that looking at the worked solution, they were able to identify errors in their work, maybe errors in formats, for example, in presentation. But the solution tends to be quite flat in that it just shows you the answer and it doesn't show how that it's built up and put together. Whereas when looking at the self-feedback comments the students generated from the video, then they were starting to talk much more about the process of the theory behind what they were doing and being able to understand how things built up, so therefore how they might be able to take it into a different context. Because from the solution, you don't get the idea that this doesn't build up in a linear manner and sort of how it all fits together. And interestingly, I could also see the students starting to answer their own questions. So if you remember, one of the questions we asked was what questions did they have for me? And after watching the video and making the comparison there, a lot of the students had already answered their own questions and didn't have anything left that they wanted feedback on. The students' perception was that the video was much more beneficial for them, and it took them much further than your traditional worked solution, which actually matched up with what I was seeing in their self-feedback comments. So the students found it a much more helpful way of trying to get to deeper levels of thinking. My advice to other people who are thinking about using these methods would be give it a go and be bold. So you have to think, first of all, your starting point has to be, what are you actually trying to achieve? Because what you'll see is different comparators will take you to different places. So in order to be able to select the most appropriate comparators, you need to be clear on where you're trying to go. So set your goal, pick your task, which doesn't need to be different to what you do already, select some comparators, and then be clear with your instructions, because the instructions can direct the task and can really focus the students on where you want them to go. But I'd say just, as I say, be brave and give it a try. There's a bit of upfront time investing in the process, but then once you have things set up, it really saves you in the long run.
If anyone's interested in doing anything in this area, please get in touch with me and Suzanne, because we have a lot of experience in doing this. I'm very interested in supporting this across the University of Glasgow.